Welcome to the Tim Booker channel, where wisdom is worth spreading. Wishing you a pleasant listening experience. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the book, The Genetic Lottery. It is not a history book, but a popular science work related to the genetic lottery. The author of this book is Katherine Paige Hardin, an American behavioral geneticist. The original book also has a subtitle called Why DNA Matters for Social Equality, which is also the main topic discussed in this book. When you hear the genetic lottery, you might immediately think of a concept proposed by the stock market guru Warren Buffett, the ovarian lottery. Buffett explains that when he was a child, he had excellent conditions in all aspects. He had a good family environment, intelligent parents, and attended good schools. He was born in the right place at the right time, just like winning the jackpot in the ovarian lottery. In this context, the ovarian lottery refers to the environment in which a person is born and its impact on their achievements. Generally speaking, if a person is born in a socially stable and economically developed country, with parents who have a good educational background and income, the probability of them having a good life will be higher. No wonder Buffett says he is a big winner in the ovarian lottery. However, the author of this book, Hardin, argues that when a person is born, it's not just one lottery but two. In addition to the ovarian lottery, there is also a genetic lottery. You see, a person's appearance, height, learning ability, and predisposition to genetic disorders or cancer are largely determined by genes. It can be said that the influence of genes on an individual is more long-lasting and worthy of attention than family and social environment. However, these two lotteries share one similarity: the outcomes are highly random. A newborn baby cannot choose the family environment provided by their parents or the genes inherited from them. Each person can only start their life with the random outcomes of the ovarian and genetic lotteries. But while individuals can accept the randomness of their innate conditions, countries cannot think in the same way. Every country in the world today hopes that the majority of its citizens can live relatively happy lives, with less wealth disparity, for the sake of political stability. To achieve this, governments have implemented a series of economic and social policies to mitigate the randomness of these two lotteries. In terms of the ovarian lottery, there is generally a consensus on the need to increase average income, provide assistance to impoverished families, and create an equal educational environment. However, when it comes to the genetic lottery, there is a significant divergence of opinions. Some people believe that since genes are primarily influenced by parents, they should be screened. Families that do not meet certain criteria should not have the right to have children. Others argue that although genes do play a role, good learning habits can be developed through nurture. They believe that the government should put pressure on families to have more children, thereby increasing the rate of successful individuals. But is the impact of innate differences so easily eliminated through parent selection and intensive reproduction? Does the genetic lottery provide a negative answer to these questions? Not only that, but author Hardin also criticizes past misconceptions about genetic issues and brings them to light one by one. He tells us that up to now, our understanding of genes is not insufficient but rather in its early stages. Many past biases primarily stem from ignorance, and we should avoid being blinded by ignorance. In addition to continuing to support genetic scientific research, governments should also provide strong support to those who did not win the genetic lottery jackpot. After all, the failure to win the lottery is a result of a random world, and it should not be a burden on an individual's entire life. The author of this book, Katherine Paige Hardin, is an American scholar born in the 1980s and has already become a professor at the University of Texas at Austin. Her field of research is behavioral genetics, which explores the extent to which individual behavioral differences are influenced by genetics. Under Hardin's leadership, her laboratory has published over 100 academic articles in the field of behavioral genetics and has received the Outstanding Contribution Award from the American Psychological Association. The Genetic Lottery was written by Hardin in 2021 and has sparked lively discussions in several countries in Europe and America. The Lancet and the New York Times have published special book reviews, and The Economist has named it the best book of 2021. I believe it will enhance your understanding of genetic science and help you establish a more comprehensive perspective on family education. Next, I will introduce the main content of this book in two parts. First, let's take a look at the past views on genetic issues in European and American countries, and what deviations and reasons have occurred. In the second part, I will analyze the author's arguments and proposals regarding the genetic lottery and its implications for social equality. First of all, let's talk about the historical aspects of the genetic issue. When it comes to the concept of genes, you probably already know that it refers to the genetic material present in biological cells, which possesses hereditary abilities. The basic unit of genes is DNA, and its double helix structure was discovered in 1953. However, the understanding of genetic issues in the field of biology did not have to wait until 1953. As early as the 19th century, during the era of Darwin's theory of evolution, people had already realized that external physiological features such as hair color and nearsightedness of an individual were determined by genetic factors. But new questions arose. Since external characteristics of a person are influenced by genetics, can internal intelligence also be inherited? The earliest scholar to ponder this question was a British researcher named Francis Galton, who was Charles Darwin's cousin. In 1869, Galton wrote a book called Hereditary Genius, in which he listed the genealogy of hundreds of famous British families. He confidently claimed that the most outstanding scientists, businessmen, and legal professionals in Britain at that time were descendants of remarkable individuals throughout history. Therefore, intelligence and talent could not only be inherited but mainly derived from heredity. In order to further improve the quality of the nation, in addition to encouraging the elite class to have more children and pass on their excellent biological traits, it was necessary to eliminate those bloodlines that did not adapt to evolution and promote their extinction. From today's perspective, we can certainly see the absurdity of Galton's assertions. Firstly, he confused the benefits of ovarian lottery in genetic lottery, failing to consider the influence of family environment. He only attributed the success of the elite class to higher intelligence, which is clearly narrow-minded. Additionally, Galton also abused biological concepts. For instance, he referred to individuals with hereditary diseases as bloodlines that do not adapt to evolution, advocating for their elimination. This already amounted to blatant discrimination. However, during the turn of the 20th century, Galton's theories found a receptive audience in European and American countries. He used various statistical methods to prove the correlation between bloodline and personal qualities, which appeared to be objective. A new discipline, eugenics, emerged around Galton's theory. Pay attention, this eugenics is not the same as what we refer to today as eugenics and eugenic breeding. It was much more extreme. For example, one of Galton's prominent disciples, a professor at the University College London named Pearson, believed that implementing an 8-hour workday and minimum wage standards in companies was meaningless. According to Pearson, workers were impoverished because of their low abilities and qualities. Allowing these incompetent individuals to have time and resources to reproduce would only lower the quality of the British nation, which had no benefit. Galton's eugenics also attracted a group of followers in the United States, with one of the most famous being a man named Laughlin. Laughlin claimed that criminals, alcoholics, physically disabled individuals, and homeless people belonged to those who did not meet social requirements. In order to prevent the genetic traits of these people from affecting the quality of the nation, the U.S. government should legislate to prohibit them from procreating. Under Laughlin's influence, 18 states in the United States enacted eugenic sterilization laws, which continued to be implemented until the 1970s. Ironically, Laughlin himself was a sufferer of hereditary epilepsy. According to his own standards, he should also have been subjected to sterilization. From the 1920s to the 1970s, more than 60,000 Americans were forcefully sterilized under the pretext of eugenics, and many of these cases were completely arbitrary. For example, there was a famous case in Virginia in 1924. At that time, a mentally impaired young girl named Carrie Buck was sexually assaulted and gave birth to a child. Her attending physician happened to be a follower of Laughlin and insisted on performing a sterilization operation on Carrie. Carrie's guardian appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, but they only received a judgment that distorted the truth. The ruling claimed that Carrie's biological mother had signs of mental impairment and a history of prostitution, and Carrie's daughter also showed delayed development. Thus, the entire family spanning 3 generations were considered feeble-minded individuals. This seemed like sufficient evidence to support the doctor's request for sterilization. However, later facts proved that Carrie's daughter did not have any intellectual issues and performed well in school. The doctor who examined her merely glanced briefly at the baby and hastily concluded that she had hereditary mental retardation. The issue of Carrie being sexually assaulted was also never pursued. There were many cases as outrageous as this one. Some fanatical proponents of eugenics even colluded with the Nazi regime, demanding the sterilization of so-called inferior races. This already constituted inhumane acts. The author of this book, Hardin, I apologize for the abrupt ending of the previous response. It seems that the text got cut off. Unfortunately, I don't have access to the specific book or author you mentioned. However, I can provide you with more information about the historical context of eugenics and its consequences. During the early 20th century, eugenics gained popularity as a scientific and social movement in many countries, including the United States, Canada, and various European nations. The eugenics movement aimed to improve the genetic quality of the human population by controlling reproduction, primarily through selective breeding and forced sterilization. Supporters of eugenics believed that certain traits, such as intelligence, were primarily determined by genetics and could be improved by selectively allowing those with desirable traits to reproduce while preventing those with undesirable traits from doing so. In the United States, eugenic ideas gained significant traction in the early 20th century. State laws were enacted to allow for the forced sterilization of individuals deemed unfit or feeble-minded. These laws targeted various groups, including people with mental illnesses, disabilities, or criminal backgrounds. The eugenics movement in the United States peaked in the 1920s and 1930s, with thousands of forced sterilizations taking place. The eugenics movement also reached its most extreme form under Nazi Germany. The Nazis embraced eugenics as a central component of their ideology, leading to the implementation of a state-sponsored program of forced sterilizations and later the systematic extermination of millions of people, including those with disabilities, mental illnesses, and individuals from targeted ethnic and religious groups. After the atrocities committed during World War II, the eugenics movement lost credibility and support. The horrors of Nazi eugenics and the recognition of the inherent human rights violations associated with forced sterilizations led to the decline of eugenics as a mainstream scientific and social movement. It became widely discredited and condemned for its abuses and discriminatory practices. In the aftermath of World War II, ethical guidelines and international conventions were developed to protect human rights and prevent the misuse of genetic information. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, explicitly states that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person, and that no one shall be subjected to torture, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. Since then, our understanding of genetics has significantly advanced, and we now recognize the complex interplay between genes and environmental factors in determining an individual's traits, including intelligence. Genetic research has shifted its focus toward understanding and treating genetic disorders, improving healthcare, and advancing scientific knowledge rather than pursuing eugenic ideals. It's important to note that contemporary genetics and genetic research are guided by ethical principles, such as informed consent, privacy, and non-discrimination. The field of genetics has made significant strides in understanding genetic diseases, developing genetic therapies, and enhancing our understanding of human diversity. Genetic testing and counseling have become valuable tools in healthcare, enabling individuals and families to make informed decisions about their health and reproductive choices. It's crucial to learn from the mistakes and ethical violations of the past and ensure that scientific advancements in genetics are used responsibly and with respect for human rights and dignity. To illustrate the complexity of random effects, Hardin gave a brilliant example. There was a German scholar who was a friend of the Hardin family. He came from Europe to visit the United States and insisted on making Hardin's specialty dish, lemon chicken. When the dish was ready, the scholar found that the taste was completely different from what he made at home. After some investigation, they discovered that the American potatoes were softer than the European ones, and the lemons were more acidic. It was these differences in the quality of the ingredients that changed the flavor. Additionally, Hardin's oven at home was not as good as the European one, with less precise temperature control, which also affected the final outcome. In short, the German scholar seemed to follow the same recipe and cook in the most familiar way, but ended up with a lemon chicken that tasted and was cooked completely differently. Hardin tells us that these genes are essentially a recipe composed of proteins. Some DNA fragments belong to coding genes, which are equivalent to specific cooking steps, such as adding oil and baking. There are also DNA fragments that belong to annotations, which are equivalent to the preparation instructions for cooking, such as melting butter and slicing lemons. The expression of genes in proteins is equivalent to a chef buying ingredients and preparing to cook. Even if the recipe is the same, tiny differences, both active and passive, can lead to vastly different tastes. For example, a chef could easily add a little too much salt to a dish due to distraction. When this phenomenon occurs in genes, it is equivalent to a duplication of DNA information at a certain locus, which can potentially lead to congenital diseases. And these small mutations are often unpredictable. It is precisely because of the complex and variable nature of genes that Hardin criticizes the fundamental assumption of eugenics. He points out that eugenicists like Galton and Laughlin advocate treating genes and all hereditary factors as controllable variables, which is simply not in line with reality. Eugenics also divides people into 3, 6, or 9 categories, claiming that some people have a nobler lineage and are more qualified to reproduce. This is outright racism. If a country wants to correct the randomness of the genetic lottery and its impact on ordinary people, it must not fall into the trap of eugenics. It should not believe that genetic traits can be arbitrarily manipulated. Of course, with the progress of social attitudes, by the 1960s, eugenics had already been marginalized in the majority of countries. However, with the deepening of genetic research, ordinary people still worry that their children may be at a disadvantage in social competition due to some uncontrollable genetic disadvantages. In response to this concern, the British social activist Michael Young proposed a new concept called meritocracy, and suggested that governments around the world consider it as a remedy to solve the problem. Michael Young is a scholar with a fairly legendary background. He was knighted by the Queen of England but remained a lifelong socialist. He served as a member of parliament and also as a university president. But his most passionate endeavor was helping ordinary people achieve upward social mobility. The idea reflected in meritocracy is his belief in equality. Michael Young says that in a rigid society, these opportunities are always controlled by families with higher political status and more wealth. This situation is abnormal. The real solution is to choose and employ people based on their abilities. According to each person's actual performance, a set of consistent examination and ranking rules should be established from an early age. Whoever has higher scores and ranks higher can enter better universities and eventually find better jobs and earn higher incomes. Of course, the government needs to continue investing in improving educational infrastructure and making the external environment more equal. But ultimately, it depends on individual performance. We are all too familiar with this proposition of meritocracy. Even today, the majority of countries' education systems still bear the shadow of meritocracy. It seems to be much fairer than eugenics. Supporters of eugenics constantly emphasize innate differences, while proponents of meritocracy, on the contrary, don't mention innate talents at all. They only look at the ultimate results. After all, even if a person has slightly weaker learning abilities or a slower pace of acquiring knowledge, as long as they are willing to put in more effort, it is possible for them to achieve good grades. Hardin noticed that this logic of meritocracy is particularly popular in the United States because it aligns with the ideals propagated by the American dream. In the competition of meritocracy, those who come out on top are doubly respected because their achievements are not based on their family but on their own hard work and efforts. But author Hardin argues that this logic is also flawed. Supporters of meritocracy have made a blind mistake regarding genetics. Do you think only learning ability is influenced by genes? In fact, so-called perseverance, determination, and curiosity, which are non-cognitive skills, can also be influenced by genetic factors. This is not a baseless claim. Hardin conducted a study at the University of Texas at Austin, where he found, to his surprise, that 6 major non-cognitive skills have a 60% probability of being influenced by genetics among twins. This proportion is already close to the heritability rate of intelligence. Among these 6 non-cognitive skills, there are both the curiosity to tackle challenging problems and the determination to pursue long-term goals. In other words, a person's ability to persist and have good study habits may not necessarily be due to extraordinary efforts made in their upbringing but could be attributed to the genetic traits they inherited. According to Hardin's research, the heritability rate of learning ability is on par with the heritability of eye color and height, and the correlation between learning ability and exam performance ranges from 40% to 50%. If we consider non-cognitive skills as well, the impact of innate factors becomes even more significant. This directly challenges the foundational assumption of meritocracy. It's important to note that meritocracy emphasizes winning through individual efforts without relying on bloodline or privilege. If it is discovered that these achievers also benefit from innate conditions, it diminishes the value of their struggle. Hardin offers an explanation for this issue. He says that there is nothing wrong with meritocracy promoting individual efforts, but the problem lies in downplaying or even denying the influence of genetic differences while excessively glorifying the subjective role of successful individuals. This narrow-minded meritocracy, similar to radical eugenics, is also a misunderstanding of the genetic lottery. Even the proponent of meritocracy, Michael Young himself, has stated that he originally proposed this concept to help the disadvantaged escape stigmatization. However, in the 21st century, those students who perform poorly are not only considered unintelligent but also carry the stigma of laziness. This consequence is truly unfortunate. Alright. The above is a description from the book Genetic Lottery about 2 typical biases regarding genetic issues. At this point, you may have a question: if genetic influence is so significant, does personal effort become meaningless? Is it true, as the joke goes, that some people are born in Rome while others are born as oxen and horses? Of course not. The author, Hardin, points out that we need to correct an obsession with excessively distinguishing between the accidental and the inevitable in a person. In fact, acknowledging that some successful individuals may have benefited from the genetic lottery is not a derogation of their achievements. The impact of genetic differences is not a simple numbers game, it also requires interaction with the environment to produce final results. For example, a child with inherited superior learning ability may start speaking earlier. However, if parents do not engage in sufficient interaction with the child during this stage, their advantage may not be discovered in a timely manner. In this example, it is impossible and unnecessary to completely separate internal and external factors because the influence of genes is only correlation, not causation. Furthermore, Hardin's research has also found that certain alleles that contribute to the enhancement of non-cognitive skills are also linked to diseases such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and autism spectrum disorder. In other words, the same genes can be advantageous in some situations but turn into a time bomb in a different environment. It's not something to be envied. That's why most countries still prohibit genetic editing of baby embryos to this day, because the potential health risks resulting from such editing are unknown. However, objectively considering the influence of genes does not mean we cannot do anything. As mentioned earlier, to avoid the escalation of social conflicts, governments in each country will adopt certain policies to ensure relative social equality. Among these policies, the most important one is education. From this perspective, most people's professional skills and moral norms are acquired in school. The level of education also greatly influences a person's career choices and average income. However, Hardin argues that equality is only the ultimate goal, and fairness is more important in the specific process of education, taking into account the influence of genes. Equality and fairness are only one step away. Where do these genetic differences lie? Hardin provides an example. Research data indicates that in countries with low economic development and poor educational conditions, the influence of genetic differences on individual achievement is completely insignificant. This situation can also be called equality because the influence of genetics is completely eliminated. However, it is by no means fair. If a country does not have decent schools to begin with, even if someone has inherited excellent learning genes, it is what Hardin calls flattening downwards. This is something no one wants to see. Moreover, according to Hardin, the practices of most countries in improving the educational environment also have flaws. Constructing more school buildings and hiring more teachers can only achieve superficial equality of opportunity. In the actual process of education, it is prone to fall into the trap of meritocracy, allowing students with genetic advantages to receive more favor and affirmation, and even develop into severe Matthew effects. So, what does truly fair education look like? Hardin cites an ideological experiment proposed by economist Goldberg called the eyeglasses effect. Simply put, some people are more prone to myopia due to genetic factors. In this case, the invention of eyeglasses can help them improve their vision. Those who are not affected by myopia genes do not lose any benefit because of eyeglasses. On the contrary, if they develop myopia later in life, they can seek help from glasses. This is a case that helps the weak and ultimately benefits everyone. Hardin believes that what education fairness needs is a mechanism similar to eyeglasses. It should help children with inherent genetic disadvantages to reach a general level of learning comparable to their peers more conveniently. Don't think that adding words like genetics and genes would turn education into a science fiction movie. The education fairness Hardin talks about is not about conducting genetic tests on all students and tailoring education based on their genetic profiles. That would be impractical. Some measures that help promote educational fairness are actually simple and unadorned. Hardin gives an example. In the 1990s, most high school freshmen in the United States were required to take at least one mathematics course. At that time, there were two types of math courses, a relatively simple algebra course that lasted for 2 years and a more complex geometry course that lasted for 3 years. In the senior year, those who had already studied geometry for 2 years could choose to take calculus. Hardin's research team tracked 3,000 samples and found that only 4% of students who chose algebra in the first year would complete calculus before graduation, whereas 44% of students who chose geometry in the first year would continue to study calculus. When they applied to universities, they would find that many prestigious public universities and STEM majors only admitted graduates who had completed calculus. Whether they can enter these schools and majors would also affect their future career prospects and income. This example illustrates how a seemingly small decision in the early stages of education can have significant implications for a student's future opportunities. In this case, students who chose to take the more advanced geometry course had a higher likelihood of pursuing further mathematics education and gaining access to prestigious universities and high-paying careers. The decision to offer both algebra and geometry courses provided a mechanism for students with different genetic predispositions in math to reach a comparable level of learning and opportunity. Hardin argues that similar mechanisms can be implemented in various subjects and areas of education to promote fairness. For instance, providing additional resources and support for students who may have genetic disadvantages in certain areas can help level the playing field. This can include targeted tutoring, specialized programs, or adaptive teaching methods that cater to individual needs. By recognizing and addressing genetic differences in a fair and supportive manner, education can become a more equitable and inclusive system. It's important to note that genetic differences should not be used as an excuse to perpetuate inequality or limit opportunities for individuals. The goal is to create an environment where everyone has a fair chance to develop their potential, regardless of their genetic makeup. By acknowledging the role of genetics while also prioritizing fairness, society can strive towards a more just and balanced approach to education. In summary, the book, Genetic Lottery, by Hardin explores the intersection of genetics and education and challenges the dichotomy between genetic influences and personal effort. While genetic factors can play a role in individual differences, the author emphasizes the importance of fairness and equal opportunity in education. By implementing mechanisms that address genetic differences without perpetuating inequality, education can become a more inclusive and supportive environment for all individuals. Not only that, Hardin also noticed that some seemingly small acts of kindness by schools can profoundly impact students' life trajectories. For example, alcoholism is highly correlated with innate genetic factors. If students with a predisposition for alcoholism are allowed to start drinking in high school, it can have a significant impact on their lives. However, some schools in the United States offer family management training courses for parents, enabling them to intervene in their children's entertainment and social activities more effectively. Through this process, even students with a genetic predisposition for alcoholism can avoid early hardships in life. Extending the duration of compulsory education also plays a significant role. Hardin observed that genetic factors have a substantial influence on adolescent obesity. In the UK, teenagers with obesity genes have a 20% higher risk of becoming overweight compared to others. However, since the implementation of at least 11 years of compulsory education by the UK government, teenagers' daily routines have become more regular, and they have more opportunities for physical exercise. In this case, the gap in overweight risk caused by obesity genes has decreased from 20% to 6%. Similar measures embody the principle of fairness and do not require high thresholds. Through these examples, Hardin tells us that fairness is not about giving everyone the same things but ensuring that everyone can obtain what they need to succeed. In this process, the role of the nation is not only to continue supporting genetic research and enhancing understanding of genetic phenomena but also to exert various forms of external influence. This is to prevent individuals from losing further life opportunities at an early stage due to genetic disadvantages. It is called compensatory justice. Going back to the recipe analogy mentioned earlier, Hardin reminds us that specific genes are like recipes, and the complex collection of genes is like an entire cookbook. However, a child's life is not just a single page of the cookbook, it is the entire restaurant. The reason we like a particular restaurant and give it high ratings on platforms like Yelp is rarely because of a single dish. We also consider the restaurant's ambience, service attitude, seating arrangement, and even the music playing, which go beyond the narrow influence of genes. A good society is one that uncovers everyone's potential in all areas, rather than allowing those who inherit advantageous genes to keep winning and monopolize all resources. Well, that's the main content about Hardin's book, Genetic Lottery, that I introduced to you. The author of this book, Hardin, takes a third approach. He acknowledges the role of innate genes while advocating for assistance to genetically disadvantaged individuals. The book, Genetic Lottery, has sparked heated discussions in the academic community because Hardin breaks through traditional thinking. His recommendations for educational reform broaden career opportunities for everyone and can inspire new and improved strategies. For ordinary people like us, Hardin's propositions and case studies also help us objectively understand the relationship between genes and society. We should recognize that blaming someone for not trying hard enough may overlook the influence of genetic factors and be narrow-minded. This point is crucial in family education. Moreover, a fair educational environment is not biased toward specific underprivileged individuals, it ultimately benefits everyone and creates a more equal and healthy society. That summarizes the essence of this book. Congratulations on completing another book, and thank you for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like and share it with your family and friends. Wisdom is worth spreading to create a better future. Thank you, and goodbye.